Hey everybody, this week on the podcast, season 2, The Process, Sonya and I talk about how to set up a business, how to take that dream of yours of writing the book and make it the reality of an LLC. You may think to yourself, how boring is that? It's actually like one of the most essential things, and without thinking of what you're doing as a business, without viewing your book advance as capital, you are going to get screwed. We certainly dealt with that with book number 1. We've corrected with book number 2, and that's what we're discussing in this episode. If you like it, don't forget to rate and review it. If you want to chat with me more, go to paulkicksnewsletter.com, sign up for my newsletter. Best way to stay in touch with me. For right now, let's get right into the episode. Thanks, everybody. Hey, Sonya, how are you?
Hello, Paul.
So today I want us to talk about, because guess what we just did? We just did our taxes.
No, I just did the taxes.
You just did the taxes.
I just did them.
And it was like, it went very smoothly this year, I gotta say.
Because I did them.
And also because I think we're getting a little bit more experienced at how to do them and how to anticipate business needs in our own business, which is largely driven by the book business.
Oh, yes.
Largely driven by me. Let us not forget me.
No.
So because it's largely driven by the book business, we've learned a lot from like book number 1 to book number 2. And like, let's just sort of dig in with all the mistakes we made right at the beginning when we were starting out in terms of expenses and what we needed and what we thought we needed. So Sonya, do you remember those dark and dreary days?
Oh, they weren't so dark. I think
they were actually really great, because it's like, oh my God, we have this flush of cash. How are we going to do it?
But I think the thinking that we did was thinking of it as a freelance. I was doing, we finance a freelance piece, like if you do something for a magazine and we have to upfront all those costs and then we get recouped. I mean, there's no really a need to budget per se, because
you're just going to get it back.
Yeah. So as we were doing that over the years with your work, we really didn't, we never had to sit down and do that.
But this was so much different with
so much different. And we were still thinking in that, I think, that same freelance kind of mentality, like it'll all work itself out in the end, and we've got plenty of money. It'll be fine. But that actually was not the case.
Yeah. So I'm not going to list figures, but what I will say is that we had a very healthy advance.
We had a very healthy advance.
As book advances go for book number 1. And
but the money never goes as far. Never goes as far as you think it does.
And we covered this a little bit earlier, where it's like how book advances are broken up. But just to repeat it, like you get a book advance in 4 different parts. So the first part, whatever the total book advance is, and let's say it's $100,000, you're getting $25,000 up front. By the time you take out your agent's fee and then taxes, you're probably somewhere around like $13,500, maybe $14,000, maybe $15,000. Right, so that's your budget to actually then go and do your research. And the way that most publishers do it is they're like, okay, when you actually finish the research, finish the first draft, that's when we'll give you your next cut. The first time around that, we had a very healthy budget. We had a lot of international travel, which was, I think, part of the reason why that budget was so healthy when we started. And then I remember us right away like buying computers. I remember us right away like buying.
Well, you needed a computer.
We did need a computer.
But I don't think that's the thing. Like, we took care of big purchases right away, which was important. What we didn't do, which we should have done, and we ultimately did do, was we began to approach it as a business. And we set
help
the first
people
thing.
Understand what you mean by that. Yeah.
So, for those that are journalists, like Paul and like myself, you work on a freelance story, you spend money out of your pocket, and then it's recouped.
Yeah.
What we were doing and what we eventually ended up doing was like, okay, well, when we didn't have as much money as we needed for certain things, we'd be like, okay, well, we'll just pay for it out of our pocket, and we'll get the money back. And we eventually did, but it was,
we were putting stuff on our credit cards. Like this was the mistake that we made with the first book was we thought, okay, well, we can recoup this by putting stuff on our personal credit card now, which is always the biggest possible mistake you can make.
Big mistake.
Always the biggest possible mistake you can make.
Big mistake.
And because it took literally, Sonya, like it took years to make that back.
It did. I don't think either of us, I certainly didn't realize, the project from start to finish was 4 years?
Yes.
So, the time frame for a freelance piece is 3 months, 6 months at the most.
At the most.
So, we bought the things that we needed to buy, but then we had other expenses.
Yes.
Like we had to, we had book translators. We had translators that were on the ground. We had journalists. Like we had a team. We had a legit team.
And we've talked about that team a little bit in the past,
Yes.
so I don't want us to dwell too much on it here. But the thing I do want us to focus on...
But we had to pay for that team.
Oh, we had to pay for that team, and it was just like, it was so much. And also, in the end, I do remember extraneous purchases that in hindsight, and this is what I want to share, I guess, with listeners. In hindsight, like, just be very careful of what it is that you absolutely think you need. Like, I was convinced to do my job well, I would need a high-res camera, even though I wasn't a photographer. My thought was, I'm going to have to shoot everything. I'm going to have to...
Well, it actually did come in handy when you went to Paris.
But I didn't need it because I needed
everything.
everything I needed was actually I could capture on my phone between just little screen grabs, between quick photos, between
Yes.
quick videos. So like that was a $500,000 purchase.
It wasn't a 500.
It was expensive.
It wasn't that expensive. It wasn't that expensive.
I remember it being expensive.
Okay, well, you remember incorrectly. What I think, what as someone who actually did your books, I will tell you our biggest expenses were paying other people. That's where our money was. That's where our money went, paying other people.
But do you think that we would have to, like, if a listener is thinking, well, my book is going to be domestic, like, I don't think that that's necessarily going to be the concern that you're going to have.
You don't know. Like, we also paid for travel expenses. We didn't know international travel is expensive. Neither of us had traveled abroad. So we didn't know how much that would cost. We certainly didn't know how to do it on a budget. We were just like, let's get over there. Let's get over there safely. Let's make it as easy as possible to get through everything. And that was expensive ultimately. Now, will we do things the same way? No. But what we did end up doing was we ended up looking at this as a business, and we set up a business for you, an LLC.
Yeah, it literally starts with an LLC.
Yes, and then with the help of our accountant, who is amazing, shout out to Andrew Mason.
Yeah.
We learned how to, give these people W-2s, make sure that they were all accounted for. Some of them lived in foreign countries, so we had to make sure that I paid them. How do you pay them with bank transfers? Managing that, but setting it up as a business just so you would also be able to receive those tax benefits.
And don't you think that setting it up as a business also sets up your mindset as a business? Like, you begin to think more like, okay, what's the best use of these funds? You start to think of it as funds rather than money, right?
Yes,
to be spent.
It does. And
it's capital.
It's
I guess.
capital. And
yes.
so, you're investing capital. The problem we ran into is that, we had to pay people out of pocket. We had to pay for things that came up that we weren't expecting. There were just a lot of things that we had to fund. And, we were like, oh, it's fine. We're going to get that money back. We're going to get that money back. And like I said, we did eventually, but sometimes, a year or so between one check and the next, or a year and a half, or whatever it was. And so that was very difficult. So the change that we made with this book going forward is the money that you've received is in a special account.
Let's just actually pause there, because I think that's important, to set up a separate account, to separate it from your personal funds.
Completely separate it.
And that has been, it's literally compartmentalizing it, and it's helped us think about that as capital, right? Not as stuff that we can utilize except as capital for the book.
Yes. And so, in your case, because you're set up as a business, anything that you need, as you research, that is not a huge purchase directly related to the book. Like when you travel, that will come out of that fund. But we still have a business account where we have money set aside, where if you need to buy a new computer, you can do that. If you need to buy, microphones, like you can do that. And it doesn't come out of the household budget. So, we're prepared, and we look at it definitely as a business. And, as soon as you got that money, we set aside all the taxes, make sure that's all covered. we just look at it completely different. You have to.
We think about it, well, we literally file quarterly taxes now, which is something we were not doing before. We are talking a lot about like, okay, where are we right now versus where are we projected to be in 3 to 4 months from now? I feel like that's been really helpful, don't you?
Well, if you're talking as far as our household budget, like, yes, it is as far as we do our own budgeting. But when it comes to the business, we are, the business expenses that you have as as a small business owner, your LLC, we keep track of reoccurring expenses and things like that we know you're going to add. Anything, though, that will come in for the book particular will come out of that account.
Sure.
Right? Sure. So, it's easier for tax purposes. It's easier for me. I think it's sometimes a little tricky for you when you're like, okay, I need to buy a book. And I'm like, okay, make sure you use this account instead of this account so we can keep track of things. But it's just a different way of doing things that we've kind of trained ourselves to do, even in the space between when the Saboteur came out a couple of years ago and, today. Any freelance money that you make, it goes into the business, and it's not part of our household budget.
The biggest mindset change for me, and I want to ask the same question of you, but the biggest mindset change for me is the first one I began to think in blocks. These are all the things I'm going to need, and then once I have all of that, I can move on to the next block. This time, I'm taking a much more piecemeal approach. It's kind of inspired by this guy named whose book is called The Duct Tape Entrepreneur, and the idea is basically you pay for the things only when you absolutely need to pay for those things. Otherwise, you see if you can get by without those things. And there are a lot of times where you actually can get by. There are workarounds. Maybe there's a book that you can buy cheaper. Maybe there's a plane trip that is instead of a car trip. There's tons of ways. Of course, when you're on the road, where are you staying? Is there a cheaper place to stay? Is there a better place to stay that's closer? There's tons of ways to constantly think about that and save yourself $200 here, $500 there, and that stuff adds up.
It really
lengthens,
does. It adds up.
Lengthens the amount of time, lengthens the budget for it, right? Mm-hmm. And just gives us peace of mind. I just feel like we have so much more peace of mind this time than we did the last time. And it just is basically, at least my ability to say, okay, I'm approaching this only in terms of what I absolutely need in this moment, and everything else can wait until I make sure that this thing that I absolutely need, I do need, and I have utilized this thing that I absolutely need.
Yeah.
How is it? Is that the same for you?
I think of it more like the one thing we learned from your reporting last time was that, it's like a tree branch. You go up and it can take you in one direction, it can take you in another, and then that branch can take you somewhere else. And so instead of preparing, ahead of time without exploring what's ahead, it's like you're writing. We learn as we go. And so I think it's also the same with the budget. We learn as we go. Right now, you don't need a team on the ground.
No.
But if you do, then we'll be able to figure that out.
And we'll say, how large is the team? Can we get by with just one person?
Right. But, we were looking at things like at one point you were overwhelmed and you had a lot of stuff that needed to get done. So we had to hire people that could come.
This is the first one.
Yes. And read book. So, there were things that we had to do and we had to pay for. And so it was kind of like, we would turn around and there would be an obstacle that we had to overcome, researching the book, and that we had to pay for. I think in this instance, as we move forward, I think we're much better prepared for those things that will happen because we're holding on to our money. We're realizing it's not going to go as far as we want it to, and just try and be really cautious. But again,
and that's regardless of the overall budget.
Yes, but again, the thing that lets us do that is being able to compartmentalize that money, have a separate bank account, put it completely out of our budget. And also, the business is completely separate, that fund. I want to make it clear, we actually have a business account that we keep, day to day, how you manage and things like that. And then this advance is set in a separate account altogether.
Yep, there's business, and then there's a separate business account just for the book. Yes. It's a highly it's run. It's an LLC with sort of professional accounting.
Keep taxes in a separate account. We compartmentalize just about everything because it makes it a lot easier for us to run. Now that may not work for everyone, which is something that,
but
I
really
want to stress.
Yeah, but it's just like you got to find a way
You have to find a way
to
to
make
really
it
separate
Yes.
that money from your budget and really have a good understanding of, you can put all that money in your account and be like, oh my God, we have a ton of money. But then you're like, I have to pay mortgage. I have to pay all of this. If you can separate it and really look at your finances and say, okay, this is what I have to spend. These are the bills I have to pay. And the other thing, like I also do, which we touched on, is we do projections. I do projections. You don't do them.
No.
I do them. So I do projections, which is part of my retail background. But I do projections. So we know, with the business where we should be, by the end of the year. I know where we should be household by the end of the year. I know, so we look at that, and numbers change very often. But just having something that we can look at and give us a little bit of peace of mind is very helpful. And so ultimately, I think the best advice that either of us could give you is the advice that we gave ourselves, which is find a system that works so you can be able to think about the advance money and as a separate entity from your home life, and really think of it as a business. Because as you write a book, it is a business. It is a business. No matter what role you take, it is not the same as, I think, being self-employed or even working independently. Like, you have your budget, you're working on a huge project, and that's how much you have to spend for the duration.
I agree. And we're getting a tax refund this year because we did such a good. Oh, no,
we're not. You see, you don't do the taxes, so why you don't even know?
Okay, well, see, there I'm wrong.
You are, you're wrong.
So that shows how much I know.
You don't know.
All right. Well, in any case, who is Now That's a Good Story Season 2, The Process, produced by
the very talented Jeffrey Willett.
Jeffrey Willett.
He's so talented.
The music comes from
also the very talented Jeffrey Willett.
Yep. Sonya and I will be back next week.
Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you like this season of Now That's a Great Story, or just getting caught up on the first, the best way to keep in touch is through the newsletter, paulkicksnewsletter.com. There, you'll get even more advice on how to be the best writer and storyteller you can be. In fact, right now, I've got a free PDF for you. The 7 rules top long-form writers follow to make more money from their stories. Sign up for the newsletter and you'll get the free PDF. Head there now, paulkicksnewsletter.com.